Welcome, everybody. My name's Annie Everall, and I'm co-director of Authors Aloud UK. Naomi Cooper is the other director, so Naomi can you give a wave as well?
Waving, I'm waving.
Waving. And welcome to the launch of The Miracle on Ebenezer Street with Katherine Doyle. And it's really great to see so many of you here. And if everyone turns up, we've got about 100, just over 100 people who will be coming. Just to let you know that we have set up an order line with the wonderful bookshop H&H Spalding, so you can, if you choose, to purchase a signed and dedicated copy of Miracle on Ebenezer Street, which is here and which is lovely. And the price is £12.99, which is inclusive of postage and packaging. And can I then now welcome and introduce Katherine to you. Katherine Doyle, she grew up in the west of Ireland, and she holds a first class BA in psychology and a first class MA in publishing. As you'll know, she's the author of the young adult Blood for Blood trilogy, which is Vendetta, Inferno and Mafiosa. And they've often been described as Romeo and Juliet meets The Godfather. And they are, if you haven't yet read them, they're brilliant. And they were inspired by her love of modern cinema. Her debut middle grade novel, The Stormkeeper's Island, which was published by Bloomsbury in 2018, is an adventure story about family, bravery and self-discovery, which actually are threads, I think, that run through all of her books. It's set on the magical island of Arranmore, where her grandparents grew up, and it's inspired by her ancestors' real-life daring sea rescues. The Lost Tide Warriors, which is the second in that series, was published in July 2019, and there are, great excitement, there are 2 further Stormkeeper titles to come. But tonight we're here to celebrate publication of her new and very special book, The Miracle on Ebenezer Street, which is published by Puffin, and which is a modern reimagining of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's celebrating also the 150th anniversary of the death of Charles Dickens. And a couple of really early reviews of it, which I loved. Emma on Goodreads says, "I love Christmas. It's truly a magical time of the year, but we're living in 2020. And who knows what Christmas 2020 is going to be like for most of us. The COVID-19 pandemic isn't going away anytime soon. So how do we find that Christmas cheer in our hearts this year? One suggestion of mine is through books, escaping the horrors of 2020 into the pages of a tinsel-trimmed story. And what better type of story is there than a beautiful children's story? The Miracle on Ebenezer Street may be written and marketed towards those in the middle grade category, and it's perfect for this age group. But this book is so much more and has so much more magic in its pages that it would be sad if people of any age didn't get to enjoy it. It's a modern spin on the classic Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and a spin in a way you won't predict." And Angela said, "Highly recommended for children aged 8 to 12-ish, I would say, and all adults that still believe. If Christmas is still in your heart and you read a chapter a night leading up to Christmas Eve, who knows what miracles might happen to you." So please welcome Katherine Doyle. Katherine, can we perhaps start by asking you just to tell us a little bit about your background and how you actually got into writing?
Sure. First of all, thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. It's nice, always nice to hear praise for the book. So my start in writing, as long as I can remember, I've always been hugely into sort of reading and writing. I was, even as a child, I used to insist on reading my poems out to the class, or writing stories in my spare time and reading them to my brothers. But it wasn't until I was in college, I had done an undergrad in psychology, and I went straight into a master's in health psychology. And I remember I was doing a research internship about non-specific benign chronic lower back pain. And it was the most unhappiest I've probably ever been in my life, because I just hated it. I realized I was sort of going down the wrong path and I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And when you write scientifically, you have to be very straight. You can't use adjectives or, be imaginative, obviously, at all. So I found that really stifling. And I think from there, I had a sort of an epiphany. And I went home to my parents, and my mom, who is here, said, I'll call the local priest. So she brought her priest friend over, and he said, what is it that you want to do with your one life, which I think was a Mary Oliver quote looking back on it, but I didn't know that at the time. And I said, I want to write. I want to be a writer. And so from there, really, my mom came along to creative writing classes with me, and I sort of discovered my voice and discovered what it felt like to share stories and not really be afraid of that. And I segued into a master's in publishing and simultaneously wrote the first draft of Vendetta, which was my YA book. And that is the one that got me an agent and sort of got my foot in the door to publishing. And I haven't left since, basically.
Good, great, thank you. And actually, it's interesting because you do write for YA and middle grade very successfully, and not every author can make that transition, across the age range. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about Miracle on Ebenezer Street and what it's about, and what made you want to write it?
Sure. Well, to answer the first part of your question, it's the story of a 10-year-old boy called George Bishop, whose father cancelled Christmas 3 years ago, right after George's mother passed away on Christmas Eve in a car accident. And sort of ever since then, George's life has been just utterly joyless, and he just desperately wants to bring Christmas back, this year particularly. And so he has a mischievous Irish grandmother called Nana Flo, who sneaks him off to Winter Wonderland in Hyde Park as an adventure before Christmas while his dad is at work. And while he's there, he stumbles into a little cabin called Marley's Christmas Curiosities. And that's where he meets the sort of mysterious Marley figure and discovers an enchanted snow globe, which seems to show a scene from George's past, a time when his mom and his dad, and his mom was alive and they were a happy family. And it's this snow globe that he takes home with him and shakes and wishes upon, that really sets into motion 3 Christmas journeys, one to Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future, that he sort of drags his father on with him to just desperately try and remind him what is so magical about Christmas, and why it's so important that they bring it back to their house and start living in kind of full color again in honor of George's mum. It's obviously a reimagining of A Christmas Carol, so there are lots of kind of hints and sort of nods to the original, which anyone who's read it will be very familiar with and will be able to spot.
I mean, I love the way the magic works in the book, and the way it unfolds. And I'm interested, why did you use the snow globe as the device for, if you like, letting leash that magic? And where did the idea of Marley's Curiosity Shop come from?
So I suppose to begin with Marley, so I'm a huge fan. I should say, Puffin approached me to write this 150th anniversary retelling about a year and a half ago, or possibly longer, because they loved the Stormkeeper series and thought that I would be able to do sort of something a little bit different, and that they would like. So when that opportunity came to me, I jumped at it, because A Christmas Carol is my favorite Christmas story of all time. And there's nobody who's watched more remakes and movies of that story than I have. And the version of it that I love the most, which may be controversial, maybe not, is A Muppets Christmas Carol. I just think it's so funny and I love it. And there is a song in A Muppets Christmas Carol called Marley and Marley. So in the Muppets Christmas Carol version, there are 2 Marleys basically, and they appear in chains to Scrooge and they sing Marley and Marley. So ever since I was younger, I just have this like weird obsession with Marley, or like there's Scrooge, but then I think, well, what about Marley? He's the inciting figure. He's the person who sets everything in motion for Scrooge and pretty much all of the iterations of the story. So I thought, I need to make a special Marley. I want my Marley to be a main character, and I want him to be mysterious and sort of enigmatic. And then I decided he would run a magical shop full of sort of Christmas trinkets and Christmas adventure, or not Christmas inventions, I should say. And so once I had Marley and his shop, I thought, well, what is the thing that George is going to discover inside Marley's Christmas Curiosities, which is a nod to the Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens as well. And I thought snow globes are they're perfect because they're an object that you can carry around with you. They're quite magical in and of themselves, and they tend to contain scenes already, or memories, if you will. So I thought, okay, that's a perfect place to put the sort of a nod to Christmas past. And that was really the snowball, or the idea that snowballed into the rest of it. But it just felt kind of right and magical, and the kind of thing that a child, for example, reading the book would be able to associate with the real world and with magic. You know, it's something I think that everybody gravitates towards. So it just felt right. And also the snow globe is also fragile, which is important in the story.
Yeah. So was it scary trying to write a modern reworking of such a classic Christmas story?
Yes, it was, because this is exactly what happened. I got offered the opportunity. I said yes immediately, because I thought, I love this story so much. Of course I can do it. You know, I really felt that it was the right decision. And then immediately afterwards, I thought, oh my God, how am I going to retell this story? You know, you're not just standing on the shoulders of one giant, you know, Dickens. Yeah. You're standing on the shoulders of like lots of other giants who have retold the story in really fantastic and impressive ways, you know. And I thought, oh, I don't want to be the person who does a terrible reimagining of it. And so, yeah, it was hugely daunting. I put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how I was going to make it my own and make it modern and make it more child-centric without, I think, losing that underlying sense of heart and humor and emotional growth that the original does so well. And I'd say I read the original a lot before I even sat down to start. I wanted it to be in my bones by the time I sat down to do it. And I hope I did a good job. It feels, I'm proud of it. But yeah, it was the most daunting thing I've ever written in that sense.
You've done a brilliant job. I mean, it is amazing. It really is amazing. I just absolutely loved it. And it's interesting because obviously the original set in Victorian times. So how did you kind of approach keeping that feel but set in your story in a modern world?
Yeah, so the first thing that I wanted to do was not update it, because I think it's just a new story, but to firmly set it in modern London. And that part for me was easy because I've spent so much time in London. I have been to Winter Wonderland many times because I'm a Christmas fanatic. So in that sense, it was easy. What I took from the Dickens, the original, was obviously nothing particularly Victorian, but the underlying sense of kind of seasonal charm and festivities that obviously happens outside of Scrooge and Scrooge's life. And that actually I found to be quite timeless. In the same way that I think humor and heart and that sort of sense of poverty of the soul when you don't have people around you and you're joyless, those themes which run very strongly through the Miracle on Ebenezer Street are the uniting factors between both versions. And as I said, they're not the kind of themes that belong only to one time. Yeah. So that part wasn't too difficult, I found.
So can I persuade you then to do a little reading, give everyone a taste?
Yes, absolutely. So just for a tiny bit of context, although I think I've kind of set it up already with that, this is the scene, the very first scene when George takes the snow globe home, and it's the middle of the night and he's thinking about his mum and his dad. George sank onto the couch and Coco the cat hopped up on his lap. They gazed into the snow globe. I wish Dad could remember what that day felt like. Coco pressed her paw against the snow globe as if to say, I wish that too. Above the fireplace, a stately oil painting loomed over them. Walter Bishop, George's great-great-grandfather and founder of Bishop Estates, had occupied pride of place in the living room of number 7 Ebenezer Street for as long as George could remember. He had been painted standing in a field beneath a giant oak tree, a hunting rifle slung artfully over his shoulder. Along the rest of the walls, white squares marked the spots where his mother's art had once hung. Born so full of colour, it was no wonder Greta had become an illustrator. George's uncle Eli used to say that the Gearhart sisters could charm a cobra if they wanted, make a palace guard roar with laughter. Once George's mother's work had cast personality across the house like a spell. Now it was all up in the attic, packed away with old clothes and photographs, her favourite books, chair and jewellery. A startled meow drew George's attention back to the snow globe. It was shining out from his fist like a miniature moon. So warm now, he had to palm it back and forth from one hand to the other like a hot potato. The glass shook as it flew back and forth. The snow swirled around the smiling snowman, dusting his green hat with white flakes. The light flared, fierce and blinding, and then all at once blinked out. George gasped. He turned the snow globe in his fist, then shook it again, but this time nothing happened. Even so, he waited and waited. Weird. Coco arched her back, then hopped off the couch and trotted away, decidedly bored. Reluctantly, George tucked the globe back into the pocket of his dressing gown. He pulled the couch throw down and curled up underneath it. Confusion soon gave way to exhaustion, George's lids growing heavy in the silence. The pitter-patter of snow against the window pane soon lulled him to sleep. He nodded off, unaware of the spell unraveling in the pocket of his dressing gown. While George dreamed of rolling fields and dancing snowmen, old Marley's magic leaked out of the snow globe in a tendril of silver smoke. It floated up over the fireplace and curled like a finger under the portrait's gilded frame. Coco watched with wide eyes as the air began to shimmer, the fabric of time and possibility shifting ever so slightly. Somewhere in the snowy distance, a clock chimed 1 a.m., and in the living room of number 7 Ebenezer Street, an oil-painted Walter Bishop reached up to straighten his tie.
I love that bit. Yeah, you know, and there's almost like a cinematography element to it. You can almost visualize the film of it. So before I ask you my next question, we've got a treat for the people listening, because Puffin have kindly offered 2 signed copies to people out there. So 2 questions, and the first person to get the question right will win a copy of Kat's book. So the first question is, when was A Christmas Carol first published? And the second is, what was its full title? So if you know the answer, pop it in the chat box, and Bev, can you keep an eye on it, and we'll find the winners by the end of the event.
Yep, no problem.
Brilliant. Okay, so my my next question is I'd like to chat to you about your characters, because there are a fantastic array of characters, and even the magical ones like Randolph, the purple reindeer, and Trixie, the miniature elf, have lives and personalities of their own, and all of them develop really well, I think, throughout the story. It's not just George and his dad that develop as they go through. But I have irrevocably fallen in love with Nana Flo, because I just think she is an amazing character. There's a luminous kind of magical quality to her, and she just smashes the stereotype of your traditional Nana. So I wondered where she's drawn from. Is she based on your own Nana, or where did she come from in your imagination?
Yeah, it's funny that you gravitated towards Nana Flo. She's probably my favorite character, and one of the few in the book who is based on someone real. So Nana Flo is based on my Nana Jo, who is my father's mother. She's alive. She's 96 years old. She has 8 children. She's the mother to my uncle who has Down syndrome, and she's his sole carer even now, and he's 62 years old. She left school at 12 years old and went to work, and she worked in a laundry throughout the Second World War, and then met my grandfather and fell in love and raised this incredible family of children, and is such a light, not just in their lives, but in all of her grandchildren's lives as well. And I think what's remarkable about her, apart from the obvious, which I've just stated, is that she's been through a lot of difficult times and hardships in her life, but she's never been cowed by them, nor by grief or loss or any sort of pain that she went through. When she was 89, she was diagnosed with cancer, and she went through chemotherapy and radiation therapy to beat cancer. So she's probably one of the most quietly inspirational people that I know, and she's got such a strength of spirit, a rare strength of spirit. I think that you don't often see that much anymore. And I wanted George to have the strongest, fiercest ally in the world. You know, he's going up against his father's grief, you know, this sort of dark shadow that is impenetrable. And so I thought, I need to give, first of all, I love both my grandmothers, and they're both very mischievous and wonderful and full of unconditional love. And I thought, well, he has to have a granny, and this granny has to be badass, basically. And so when I started writing her, she came very fully formed, because she came from a place in my heart that's very real. And I named her Nana Flo after Nana Joe, and it's probably the character that most people who have read it so far like the most. And I'm really happy about that, because, you know, in my head, she's a real person, and she's worthy, I think, of love and respect.
Well, we've actually had a question pop up in the chat box which I think is appropriate. And the question is, has your Nana Joe read the book, and what does she think of Nana Flo?
Nana Joe has not read the book yet, but I'm hopeful that she will read it soon. And I just wrote a sort of a piece about her for an Irish, she lives in Dublin, for an Irish magazine, sort of singing her praises. So I think she'll enjoy reading that as well. It's a little bit shorter. But like I said, she's the sole carer to her son Park. So she's still very busy, but she will read it coming up to Christmas. And I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful that she will be complimented by Nana Flo.
Oh, I'm sure she will. I mean, she really is an amazing character in the book. And I think one of my favourite lines of the book is when she leaves George and his dad and takes off on the back of the reindeer with the elf, and says, "I'm not yet done with adventuring." And, you know, that yes, there was something about her that I really loved. And I think one of the things I felt reading the book is that at its heart, it is a book about families, and it is a book about dealing with grief and how different people deal with it in different ways, as well as wrapped up in the magic of Christmas. So what would you want children who read it? What are the kind of key messages that you'd like children to take from that?
That's a good question. I think one thing that's really important to me that I try to instill in everything I write, and particularly in this book, is that it's okay, or rather, you shouldn't have to feel like you should ever fully grow up. That's the first thing. My brother and I always say that's the sad thing about growing older, is some people grow out of their sense of whimsy and their sense of magic. I think one of the lessons in the book that Nana Flo encapsulates so well is it doesn't matter what age you are, you can retain a sense of mischief and adventure all the days of your life. And I think what's important in today's world is there's a lot of pressure on children, particularly this year, and with the advent of social media. And I think it's just the idea that you don't have to grow up or become, joyless just because you're getting older. And then obviously the importance of family. You know, the thing about George and Hugo, they're in the same way that Scrooge was very well off, but they have a real poverty of spirit because they don't have a lot of people around them. Hugo won't let people love him and love his son. And I think the lesson is your wealth, apart from being your health, your wealth is your family, and your wealth is the people who you love and the people who love you. And I think this Christmas more than ever, that's at the forefront of everyone's minds. And so I think it's about learning to treasure that over presence or materialism, and telling the people you love that you love them, and spending as much time as possible with them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And although it is about grief and it is about people, kind of shutting down to a degree because they can't handle the emotions that they've got, there's also a lot of humour in the book, and that humour comes through, situations like in the Christmas present cameo when they visit George's cousin's house, which I think is extremely funny, and then through the characters like Randolph, the purple reindeer, and the fact that he's at odds with his brother Rudolph, and things like that, and the descriptions, like when they're flying through the air and George muses what they must look like, to passengers on that bus. And I think what he says is, with 3 pajamaed adventurers and 1 miniature elf riding on the back of a giant purple reindeer through the streets of London, and the image that conjures up. But at the same time, as it is also about families and about grief. And I found myself one minute laughing crazily, and then the next on the edge of tears, because there was such a poignancy about the situation, like with Bobby, when she comes out and calls to George, "If you're out there, I just want you to know I miss you." And how hard was it to kind of balance that sort of humour with those emotions, and were you deliberately trying to get that balance between them?
That's a good question. So I love humour, and I come from a very, I would say, funny family, in that we use humour in a lot of different ways, and we always have to tease each other, to say I love you, to get through hard moments, particularly moments about grief. And I don't know if that's my Irishness or just my family or a little bit of both, but that comes quite naturally to me. Those twin currents of sadness and humor are always quite close together for me. And so the humorous parts in The Miracle on Ebenezer Street were so enjoyable. So enjoyable. There was no situation too ludicrous that I didn't make even more ludicrous by thinking, what was the funniest thing that could happen here? But of course, that's all just sort of incidental in a way. It's, you're adding in building blocks, but the thread of the story is always George and his father trying to muddle through grief together, come back to each other, and find a place of happiness again. And that's not funny, and it shouldn't be funny. That's a real human experience, and it's a thing that everybody can relate to. And that was the main thread that I always held on to. The rest was just about adding in just enough humor and enough kind of snappy dialogue to get to where they needed to go in a way that would be enjoyable to write and to read. And I think having established that so early on, and also having A Christmas Carol, which I think does humor and sort of seriousness very well side by side, that was really my guiding force. And so once I had that, it was just about putting all the pieces together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, it does, and it does. It works extremely well. I wonder if we could persuade you. Do you have a second reading that you might share with us?
I do have a second reading. The second reading, I'm just trying to remember where. Okay, so this takes place after the journey to Christmas Past, which was not successful, actually. It really traumatized Hugo. It didn't work out as George was hoping, so he's feeling a little bit surly about his magical snow globe. So he goes to the park with Nana Flo because she has a conference with the ducks, and she tells him to come along with her. So George brings his sketchbook. George set to work, losing himself in the flow of his drawing. Where once it had seemed impossible to put pencil to paper, now he couldn't seem to stop. He wasn't anywhere near as talented as his mum, but when he sketched, the rest of the world melted away. He felt closer to her somehow. He felt like he was sending a message to himself and to her. I won't forget you, no matter what. After a while, the bench creaked under the weight of a new visitor. George kept his eyes on his drawing, even as the ruffling pages of a newspaper disturbed the air beside his left ear. Instinctively, he grabbed his snow globe and settled it safely in his lap. Nice trinket, came a man's voice from behind the newspaper. George glanced up at him. Not really, it's broken. The man turned a page. Have you tried switching it on and off again? It's a snow globe, George told the brim of the man's grey hat, which was just visible over the very top of the newspaper. It doesn't have a switch. Then how can it be broken? George frowned. It just is. The man hummed as he turned another page. Do you like cake? Of course, said George quickly. Who doesn't like cake? Well, quite, agreed the man. I was just thinking to myself that it takes more than one layer to make a particularly good cake. Wouldn't you agree? I suppose, said George slowly. Well, said the man thoughtfully, perhaps it takes more than one good shake to make a miracle. George blinked in surprise. He was sure he hadn't mentioned anything about a miracle just now. Had he? What do you mean? He said cautiously. I mean, the next time you shake that thing, put some thought into it, some intention, then see what happens. The man's response stunned George into momentary silence. The man gave his newspaper a good ruffle. You know, I think they're quite alike in that way, in fact, he went on. Cake and miracles. They're always well received. They bring about a most pure form of joy, and of course, they're both becoming increasingly gluten-free. George frowned. I think that last one is just cakes. Ah, my mistake. It was then that George noticed the date on the man's newspaper, 1843. Hey, you're out of place entirely. You're quite right. The man rose quickly to his feet and folded his newspaper in two. He jammed it under his arm. Beneath the shade of his unusually tall hat, George caught the telltale gleam of ice blue eyes. The rim of wired spectacles balanced on the very tip of his nose. I must be off. George jumped up. Wait, it's you! You don't mind if I leave a little Christmas behind, do you? Marley reached into his pocket and hung a small white flake in the air, where it floated, quite impossibly, all on its own. He flicked it once with his index finger. It began to twirl, faster and faster and faster, and then it started to snow.
I love the gluten-free touch, by the way. That worked very well with me as a gluten-free person. So if you could choose one magical item from Marley's Curiosity Shop, what would you choose and why?
That is a great question. Wow, that is a very good question. There's a lot going on in that shop. Would I take it? You know what? I think I probably regret this immediately, but I think I would take one of the wooden elves from the Trixie shelf, because I think having a tiny animated elf on the shelf would be quite hilarious, particularly around Christmas time. But I have a feeling that Trixie would become very annoying very quickly.
I think she'd be hard to control.
Yeah. You'd be trying to fall asleep and she'd be like knocking on your head or something, trying to keep you awake. Yeah. But yeah, I think something really. There is another thing that I would like to say, but it's a massive spoiler, so I shouldn't say it. Yeah. But I will just say Trixie.
Yeah. Me, it would be a snow globe, because I love snow globes, and I know she's in the background, but I think Bev is another snow globe fan, so it would definitely be the snow globe. But yes, all sorts of possibilities. So I think the other thing that I really loved about the book was the illustrated chapter headings by Pedro Riquelme. I thought they really added to and supported the story, and they were really imaginative. So whose idea was that? Was that Puffin? Was that you? Was it a combination? Did you work with the illustrator? How did that happen?
So it wasn't my idea, and the reason is I didn't know. You know, when you write a story, you want all the trimmings, you know, as much illustration as possible. So, but you have to wait and see what the budget will give you or what they'll give you, to be perfectly honest. So I think they said, well, what do you think about chapter headings? And I thought, yes, because Pedro had done an early draft of the cover at that point. And when he sent it over, I just lost my breath. It was just incredible. And it was so much the whimsical, magical, colorful tone of the book. It really just was incredible. And I thought, yes, let's get Pedro to draw as many extra things as possible. And so then we came up with the images together based on what happens. And like you said earlier, a lot of the chapters are quite filmic. So there's usually one or two very startling images of things that happen in the chapter. So from there, we pulled them out, and then he just applied his imagination to what he read. And I think did an incredible job. I'm so grateful to him. I think he said it was his first English, I hope this is correct, English book cover that he'd ever done. Wow. But he's an incredible, I think he's Spanish, he's an incredible artist. I'm really grateful that we got him, and then we really put him to work.
Yeah, no, I think I think they really are beautiful, and I'm sure people out there, once they read it, will enjoy them as much as I did. So can we ask what you're working on next? What are you going to be doing now?
So what am I working on? So the third Stormkeeper book comes out in March, and I'm literally just proofreading that at the moment. And that's actually the end of the series. It's a trilogy now. Surprise! So that's being proofread, and then I'm starting early work on my new middle grade, which will follow that, and that is sort of a magical Narnia-esque adventure, again set in Ireland with lots of humor and magic. And it's early stages, so I hesitate to say any more. It's just in case, but a similar vein of what I usually do, but in just different characters, different setting, different plot, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is, there may well be people in our audience who want to write or are writing. What would your sort of top tips for would-be writers be?
I usually have three. So the first one, and this is probably for this audience is an unnecessary tip, but I shall say it nonetheless. It's usually what I say to children, and when they ask, is to just read constantly, and particularly in the genre that you want to write in, because I really believe every time I read a book, I soak up a little bit more information or skill naturally based on whatever work I'm reading, and that really stands to me, particularly as I go in to write a book. I like to read about 10 books before I sit down to write. The next thing is, it's such a game changer. It might seem really obvious, but I didn't do this for my first 3 books, is make a meticulous plan. So make a chapter by chapter plan of what you want to do, because a lot of the time I think you can have this big idea, and usually you'll have a clever twist. You'll have an idea for like the main thing and then maybe a twist at the end or something, and you'll be really excited. But when you sit down to write it, 30 or 40 chapters, that's a lot of chapters. So instead of kind of writing your way into the story and getting muddled and then trying to figure out how you're going to, I find that it's really helpful to do a really comprehensive plan, step by step, chapter by chapter, who's getting introduced where, and in that sense you don't get tangled up as bad. I always get tangled up. You don't get tangled up as badly. And the third thing, which I think it took me a long time to figure out, is a thing called imposter syndrome, or getting halfway or partway into a draft and then thinking, oh, this is terrible. What am I doing? I'm not a good writer. And I think if you feel those feelings, that they're real and that they're logical, and then you think, I'll just give up. It's not worth it. It took me a long time to realize that pretty much everyone I know, every author I know, has that exact feeling, usually around a third of the way through the draft. And if any of us had listened to it, none of our books would be published. I think part of being a creative person is coming up against that same self-esteem roadblock again and again and again. And part of being a published author is learning to ignore it and pushing through. And usually I don't end up particularly liking my books until the proofreading stage. A lot of the time I'm so sick of them, or I don't think they work, and then I'll have a moment where I'll be like, oh no, I do, I'm proud of this now. But that doesn't come at the start for a lot of people, and I think the more burgeoning authors that know that, the better. Your self-doubt is your worst enemy, so just ignore it.
And stepping back, what would you say, when you step back and look, what would you say makes a really great story?
So for me, I always love, and this won't surprise you, I like humor in stories. And I don't care what the story is, if it's a horror, if it's a tale about grief. I think I like good dialogue and good humor. I think it's really compelling. And then the other thing that's really important is your characters, really believable characters. You can make your characters do anything as long as they're believable. And the best way to do that, and what I do, obviously, I just look at people in my real life and I think, who's going in this book? And I'll just put them in, you know. In Stormkeeper, the grandfather is based on my grandfather. In this, I don't just put everybody I know into a book, but usually one or two people, even if it's just their laugh or something about them that you particularly love. I always try and seed that into my book, and that makes it feel real really early on for me. And then from there, it's easier, I think, to write some of the more magical elements.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see if we've got any questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, would you just like to pop it in the chat box? Let me go through and see if there's anything. Lots of comments. Yeah, people do like snow globes, and lots of responses to our competition, which I'll come back to. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to ask Kat? I think you've stunned them all. How do you overcome, this is from Laura, how do you overcome writer's block?
How do I overcome writer's block? That's a good question, because it's a very real thing and it's really annoying when you're on a deadline. I stop writing. I stop writing, and then what I do is I'll usually go for a big long walk and I'll listen to a lot of music. Or I'll watch a movie. Movies probably for me are most effective. I try to consume a story in a different medium. And usually if it's a good story and if I'm really enjoying it, that will make me excited. It'll make me feel really imaginative. And then when I return to the story, I'll usually feel like I'm in a different place mentally. If that doesn't work after one movie or one walk, I think don't be afraid to take a few days off, a few days away from it, and just give yourself a break.
Yeah. What's your favourite thing in Marley's Curiosity Shop?
So at the start, when George goes into Marley's Curiosity Shop, there's a tray of Christmas crackers, and the rule is one per child. So you get to pull a free Christmas cracker. And I think as a concept, when I was coming up with it, and you can find anything in that. So for example, two little boys get telescopes, and when you look in them, you can see space, so you can see underneath the ocean. And another girl gets a real life butterfly that flies around, and another one gets a music box that sings to her. You can get anything magical in these Christmas crackers. So I would say if I walked into Marley's Christmas Curiosity Shop, I'd go straight for the Christmas crackers. But they're much like Christmas crackers in real life, just way cooler because you get magical things in them. So I think that's probably the first thing that I would do, is immediately pull a Christmas cracker, and I hope that it's not empty, because an empty cracker is a Scrooge.
Yeah, I love that idea. Okay, and Bev says, as a fellow Christmas freak, what's your favourite Christmas movie after The Muppet Christmas Carol, of course?
Of course, Christmas freak indeed. Okay, so I've been recommending this to everyone for the last year. It is a new Christmas movie, which might be controversial. It's called Klaus on Netflix. And I watched it last year on a whim. So I thought, oh, it's good. It looks a bit Disney-esque to me. I watched it and I cried and I laughed. And it's probably one of the best movies I've seen in the last 5 years. It's really, really good. And I would recommend that to everyone.
Well, as a fellow Christmas freak, I've just added that to my list of things to watch. Another question. What would happen if a child took a second cracker in the shop?
That is a good question. So, even though I've never considered this before, Althea, you have a mischievous mind. Marley operates a naughty corner in Marley's Christmas Curiosities, and we know this because Trixie, the elf, has been sent to the naughty corner on many occasions. So that child would not be allowed to keep the contents of the second cracker, and he would have to go over and stand in the naughty corner until such time as Marley decides that he has learned. I've actually made that child a boy in my head, because I have two brothers, and in my head I'm just thinking that's something my brothers would do. So until the child, he or she, could be a girl, feels remorseful enough, they can leave the naughty corner.
Fair enough. I think that's all the questions from the... did you plan Stormkeeper as a trilogy from the beginning, or did it grow as you wrote the story? That's from Barbara.
Question. Yeah, the Stormkeeper, that was tricky because I planned it as a standalone initially, and because when it sold on a partial, so there's only 3 chapters written. And as I started getting to the end of the book, I realized, oh, this is going to be, needs to be a bigger story. So then it became 4 books. And then as I started writing book 3, I realized that it made more sense to be 3 books, because I wanted the big sort of climactic showdown to happen in book 3, instead of dragging it out over 2 books and diluting the power of the trilogy or the series. So it started as 1, became 4, and then now it's 3, and 3 is the magic number, definitely. But yeah, that was a weird one. It went back and forth.
Althea says she loves the fact that there is a consequence to a child's action in the shop.
Consequence to everything in Marley's world.
I think can I also tell you about some future virtual events that we will be doing, that you can look out for details on social media. We'll be doing a book launch with Steve Anthony and Peter Bentley on the 10th of November to launch their new version of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in partnership with Hachette. In January, on the 21st of January, we'll be doing a book launch for poet Alex Wharton and illustrator Katie Riddell for their brand new poetry collection, Daydreams and Jelly Beans. We're going to be organising a variety of virtual tours over the next 3 to 6 months. So if you're interested in maybe your school participating in one of those, do get in touch. And as always, if you don't want your details kept on file so that we can notify you of future events, please do email me and I will remove you from my list. Which brings me to bringing the evening to a close, and I need to say a few thanks. Thank you to Puffin, Penguin Random House, for asking us to host the launch tonight, and Clemmy from PRH is here, so thanks Clemmy. Thanks to Bev for being in the background and making sure Zoom behaves itself. Thank you to all of you for coming tonight and for supporting us by booking authors for your schools and libraries and coming to our events. It means a great deal to us. And finally, a special, huge thanks to Katherine for such a great evening. And for me personally, when I was a child of about 9, my younger sister came home from school one day and she started to tell me about a story that her teacher had been reading to the class that day about children who found a magic land through the back of a wardrobe. And I fell in love with the story and made my sister tell me the next instalment as soon as she got home each day. Well, it came to Friday and I couldn't wait for Monday. So I made my mum go and buy me a copy of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Igniting that kind of magic and excitement in the reader is what we want for children that we give books to. And Kat, reading your book, I felt that again. It was a really special feeling. I actually think this is going to be a perfect book for teachers to read a chapter a day to their classes, or as parents to their families in that run-up to Christmas. As Walter says to George in the book, a little bit of magic goes a long way, and this is definitely a little piece of magic, and I think we all hope that it goes a long way. So can you raise your glasses, your mugs, your whatever you've got to hand, and join me in saying congratulations, Katherine. Thank you for giving us such a wonderful book that I'm sure is going to join the ranks of Christmas classics. And a special thank you, and let's celebrate Puffin's 80th birthday, because we all know that some of the best in UK children's books have been published by the wonderful Puffin imprint. And here's to looking to many, many more future Puffin trailblazers in getting children and young people to discover a love of reading.